Hi guys, welcome to another Flight Deck 2 Sim tutorial. In today's video we're going to fly an NDB approach using my company's operating procedures. So we're currently in the Canary Islands. We're just holding to the east of La Palma Island, which is also where La Palma Airport is. The initial approach fix is Araco. If I bring up the approach chart, you can see we're holding there at 6,000 feet. After Araco we're going to fly this DME arc to establish ourselves on the final approach track onto the NDB approach, and then disconnect at the missed approach point, and then fly the rest of the approach visually to a landing. Now, just to show you what I've got set up in the aircraft before flying the approach to make it as realistic as possible, you can see the NDB 389. Well, if we look down here, you can see on the radio pedestal on the ADF I have 389 tuned, and it's identified as Bravo Victor, when if you look at the approach chart it's Bravo X-ray. Now that's because the FSX database is slightly out of date. It's based on a different identification, but it is the correct NDB. The ADF is pointing at that beacon correctly with the new frequency on the approach chart. Next we have the final approach track of 351 degrees, so you can look here on the MCP, you can see I've got 351 set both sides. Now that's not the direction of the runway. You can see on the approach chart it says the final approach track is offset by 14 degrees right of centreline. That's because La Palma is very mountainous. There's lots of terrain there, so they can't build a straight-in approach, so they've offset it slightly to ensure that we are clear of terrain on the approach. Let's have a look at some other information. Now, because the approach is coded in the FMC correctly, see if I go to departure arrivals and I've selected November Delta Mike 36, that means we could use LNAV and VNAV to fly this NDB approach. If it wasn't coded, we'd have to use heading, select and vertical speed, or we could build our own approach and use LNAV. But we'll use LNAV and VNAV today because the correct approach is in the FMC. Now let's step through the waypoint to see if it matches the chart. So if I go to plan display, we can step through each waypoint. So looking at the chart, we're holding at Araco at 6,000 feet. The next waypoint in the FMC is Charlie Quebec 36. That's to be at or above 4,500. That's DME 16 Bravo Victor here on the chart. You can see there. After that, we're going to turn final, and then passing the final approach fix at 3,400 feet. That's Foxtrot Quebec 36. We then descend 3.3 degrees to the missed approach point, which is Mike Quebec 36, which is 1,573 feet in the FMC, which is the minimums of 1,600 feet for the approach. And you can see on the PFD here I've selected 1640. If you've seen my non-precision approach, I explained why we add the 40 feet to the minimum descent altitude. Is to ensure that we don't actually ever get below 1,600 feet, which is the MDA. So another bit of information I'd like to give you, you can see that DME and VOR is required. Well, that's because the beacon is what we're flying for the NDB, but the DME distance is co-located with the beacon. So I've got 112.4 tuned. You can see here on the nav receiver 112.4. And you can see if I go back to map here on the EFIS, you can see the distance there. So we can basically back that up raw data when we're using LNAV and VNAV for this approach. That's it. Pretty much everything else is ready to go. I've done the landing performance already. I've gone to flat 30 order break 3. It's about a 2,200 meter runway down there. Sorry, 2,100 meters on the chart. So it's a little bit shorter than usual, but just good enough to use flat 30. That's it, so I'll complete the descent checklist and you can meet me just leaving Araco for the approach. Okay guys, we're just approaching Araco. I've used the armed exit hold function, so there you go. We can see we've now passed it. We've now left the hold and we're turning left using LNAV to establish ourselves on the 16-mile arc for this approach. You can see here on the approach chart it's a 16-mile arc. We're approaching the top of descent point, so anticipation for descent, we're going to set 4,500 feet. We'll imagine we've been cleared for the approach by Canary's approach. So we're going to set 4,500 feet. We engage VNAV, and it's accelerating now to 240 knots, which I don't actually want it to do. So I'll update the target speed to 220. It should do that as soon as we approach the top of descent. Well, it is already 220. I'm not sure why it's accelerated to 240 knots then, because I've got the target speed as 220. There we go, it's bugged 220, so that's probably a bit of a simonism there. So because I've set 4,500 feet, we're past the top of descent point. The aircraft will eventually start a very gradual descent to ensure that we pass over the next waypoint at 4,500 feet or above at Charlie Quebec 36, which is 9.5 miles. So now we're all ready for the approach. The aircraft will eventually descend. We'll do the approach checklist. Now, just before we do the approach checklist, we'll make sure everything's tuned correctly. So we've got the ADF tuned to 389 for the NDB for raw data. We've also got the DME distance as well for 112.4. Range rings I've put in for 10 and 5 miles. They're the last points. 10 miles is the last place at which we can select flap 1. 5 miles is the last point at which we can select gear down flap 15. But today I'm going to configure a lot sooner because it's a steep glide path, and also I want to be nice and stabilised for the approach by the time we get to the missed approach waypoint. Standby instruments are set, so we want ADF as a backup. You can see the needles pointing towards the beacon, and the inbound courses of 351 and 351, the approach checklist, which we can now complete looking at the control column. So you can see here approach checklist. Altimeter's instruments will set and cross that. Set and cross check that. Approach aids checked and set, and the standby ADI is set. Approach checklist is now complete. So you can see now the aircraft started a gradual descent in VNAV path. The auto throttle's gone to arm, which means I can manipulate the thrust levers. So you can see here, looking wherever I move them, thrust will decrease or increase. That's a feature of VNAV path. So you can see the speed's getting a little bit high there. I can leave the thruster idle, perhaps use speed brake if I want to, but we'll leave it as it is. So looking at the approach chart again, you can see after passing D16 we want to be able to descend to 3,400 feet. So when we've been cleared for a procedural approach, we leave the MCP altitude set to the next waypoint until we're 2 miles before the next waypoint. So you can see here on the ND we're approaching 2 miles, so we can now select the next lowest altitude, which, look at the chart, is 3,400 feet. So that is now set. That ensures the aircraft keeps descending. Alright, now there we go, we're over the first waypoint in the approach, so we're now inbound to the faff at 8.5 miles from Bravo Victor, and I want to now start slowing the airplane down because we're approaching the decel point. So what I'm going to do is select flap 1 and open the speed window, and it stays in VNAV path because I've got the flaps extended. I'm now going to bug the flap 1 speed. Okay, we'll now monitor the speed to see if it starts slowing down. If it doesn't, we can start using more flap to increase our drag, or perhaps speed brake as well as a combination. So you can see the speed's not really coming back, so I'm going to go straight to flap 5 and see how that deals with that. You can select flap 5 so long as you're below 250 knots. That's absolutely fine. We'll bug the flap 5 speed, which will be about 164. Good. So now we're on the final approach. You can see, looking here at the ND, this white dashed line is the extended centre line. Now obviously, remember we mentioned how it's offset by 14 degrees. That's because this white dashed line is over mountainous terrain. We don't really want to be on it. Oh, and another thing which I forgot to mention, chaps, is that terrain inhibits on. That's because I moved the terrain inhibit switch to off. Now that's really bad practice. You wouldn't do that in real life. But I flew this approach earlier to practice, and I kept getting spurious terrain warnings, which wasn't very realistic. Right, let's now match the heading. Excellent. So the next waypoint we're approaching is Foxtrot Delta 36, which is the final approach fix. So again, 2 miles before that we can select the next cleared altitude, which in this case is the minimum. So I'm going to set 1,700 feet. So approaching 2 miles, 1,700 feet is now set. We verify we've got VNAV path engaged, and the FMA says VNAV path, and the speed window's open to ensure that we descend on the vertical profile in the FMC. So the next waypoint we're looking out for is the final approach fix, and when we pass this point where we do an altitude cross check to ensure there's no errors at that point. Approaching 1 mile. As soon as we've done that, we'll configure the geared out flap 15 for landing in preparation for the approach. See there's a lovely island using freeware scenery. I'll leave a link in the description as to where you can find it. Perfect, so approaching the faff now. Again, looking at the approach chart, you can see at 8.5 miles, there's the distance there. And here we go, 5 miles, we're going to be at 3,400 feet. There we go, so faff checks, and we've got no flags on the standby altimeter. So now configure for landing, so gear down, flap 15, we'll do the landing checklist of flaps. Start switch is continuous, recall is checked, speed brake on green light, landing gear down 3 green, auto brake 3 is set. We're holding on the landing flaps. We'll imagine being cleared to land, so we'll put all the lights on. Let's select the landing flap. Oops, forgot to match speed. And we're going to go flap 30 today. VRF plus 5 is going to be the approach speed. wait for the flaps to get configured, finish the landing checklist. It's actually quite a standardised checklist, it's exactly the same in my company, this one. So flaps, we check that we've got 30 required, which is here, 30 selected, green light, landing lights are on, we've been cleared to land, landing checklist complete, cabin crew are seated. So, one more thing we need to do before we disconnect. If you look at the approach chart once more time again, you can see the missed approach altitude is 3,000 feet, so we need to set that. Now, we'd usually set that 1,000 feet above aerodrome level, but because of the high minimums today, we're going to actually set it 300 feet above our minimum height, which is going to be 2,000 feet. Hopefully the aircraft won't level off when we do this, it will carry on descending. It should do. Sometimes with PMDG it wants to level off when you set the missed approach altitude. If that happens, we'll just disconnect and I'll fly manually. So approaching that missed approach point, which we mentioned, that's the Mike Quebec 36. You can see the minimums coming up. You can just about see the runway in the distance. Perfect. We'll try set the missed approach altitude now. Hopefully the aircraft won't level off. Good, it hasn't. So 3,000 feet is set, 3,000 checked. Getting ready now to disconnect and fly manually, approaching the MDA and the missed approach point. And if we weren't visual, if we're IMC here at this green point, we'd have to fly the missed approach. Plus hundreds checked. Land. We'll now disconnect the autopilot, recycle the flight directives, and now I'm going to continue flying manually, looking outside at this point. So everything's complete at this point. You can see how the runway's offset in the distance. We're just going to continue descending, watch my rate of descent so I don't get too low. Setting an attitude of about 2.5 degrees, which you can see on the PFD. The key is here, there's no guidance now, I don't have anything on the flight director follow, so it's all doing it visually. It's a little bit more difficult in FSX in real life, I find, because you don't have that spatial awareness of being able to move your head around. I'm just going to readjust my seating position slightly so I get a good picture. There we go. Good, so you can see the runway there. Start pitching nose down.
1,000.
Move the head down again. 1,000 feet checked. Speed's looking good. Now start turning final to be on the extended centreline. This is where I got the terrain warning before, which was a bit unrealistic, so that's why I turned it off. I wouldn't do that in real life, as you can imagine. Now lining up cells on the extended centreline. Now, annoyingly, I can't see the pappies yet. That's another problem with FSX I find. In real life, you'd see the pappies now, be able to make adjustments, so I can't tell if I'm too high or too low. Really, probably a tad high. Yes, there we go. Here's the pappies. 3 whites, 2 reds, 2 whites, 2 reds. So I'm on profile now. Oh, off the centre line there. It's not very good. Get back on the centre line. Keep descending. Speed's a tad high, so I'm just going to reduce thrust slightly. Watching the rate of descent. Keep it descending. Over the hopefully the threshold at 50 feet. There we go.
50, 40, 30,
30.
20.
Check.
10.
Close the thrust loops, just holding the attitude, hopefully the touchdown zone. There we go, touchdown. So speed breaks up, selecting reverse thrust. Oh, a bit of the runway's missing, I noticed that earlier. 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots, cancelling reverse, cancelling the auto brake, and we'll roll all the way to the end of the runway where there's a turning circle, so we'll just let the aircraft roll there. So that, guys, was an NDB approach into La Palma. I hope you found that interesting. What we'll do, so I'm sure you're quite interested, we'll go all the way onto stand, do a shutdown just as we would in real life. So here we have a turning pad here. At certain airports you can actually do a 45-degree turn on the runway. I'm not sure about La Palma if that's permitted. Usually if there's a turning pad, the airport authorities would like you to go all the way to the end and do a 180-degree turn. So see there at the end, make the 180-degree turn now, making sure I'm on the runway at all times. Don't need to follow the yellow line, that's probably for a larger wide body aircraft like a 330 or a 757. We can now start going back on the other runway. Perfect. So usually we wouldn't clean up the aircraft until we receive taxi instructions, but I'll start cleaning it up now if I just get on the centre line. So go over to the first officer's side. He would, well, that would obviously be down, but would set the transponder to out of, select the flaps to up, select the auto brake to off. I'm basically taxiing without any feet sort of thrust at the moment. Just pushing in a straight line, which is quite unrealistic. But the taxi would be doing this. The first officer, sorry, would be doing the clean-up flow whilst the captain is taxiing. Captain stow the speed brake, order brake off. Flight director's already off. And just reset the missed approach altitude. We set it to the nearest 100 feet, so we don't. That's a reminder, sorry, that we haven't got the departure clearance on the next sector. Start switches go to off. That goes off, vacating the runway, and then the probe's off as well. Perfect. And look, I haven't deviated off the line at all. So here's the yellow line. We can vacate here at Charlie. So I'm just going to brake slightly here. Whoa! What in the world just happened there? I told you, something always happens in my tutorials. Crikey, I don't know what that was all about. Anyway, we'll vacate at Charlie. You can see here's the taxiway chart, and we'll go on to, let's say, stand 5, vacating at Charlie. So we've got a master caution there. That'll be for the pros being turned off. We'll reset that. We'll start the APU as well. And the captain will turn all the free tracks and fix landing lights off. Yeah, jumping jack kangaroo airplane today. So taxiing, following the yellow line, overshooting ever so slightly because the nose wheel's behind us. Crossing stand 14. Go all the way to stand 5. So as I mentioned, you saw there I was doing the taxi inflow on the runway. Usually we'd wait until we'd been vacated the runway, received our taxi instructions, and then the first officer would clean up the aircraft. And obviously you have to appreciate that using the FSX or PMDG or any aircraft using Flight Simulator, it's single pilot ops in a multi-crew aircraft, so you just have to multitask all of those jobs. Carry on taxiing onto stand. There's stand 6. A little bit of thrust. And hopefully this will be stand 5. AP is available, so we'll pop that on the bus, ready to shut the engines down. There we go, there's stand 5. So start braking. Looking out the window. There we go, just follow the taxi line like so. Usually you'd overshoot the line slightly here when you're turning. And you can see where the stop line is there. Perfect. And this is what we call a self-positioning stand. So when you start the engines, you just make a left turn. There's no pushback here in La Palma as such. Okay, perfect. Bring it to a stop, set the parking brake. Let's now shut it all down. So we've got 2 blues, 1 red. Engines can now go dead. What I'll do is a transit shutdown, just imagining we were doing a 30-minute turnaround or something. So seatbelts would go off, we'd do a PA to the passengers, cabin crew, disarm, slides, open doors, welcome to La Palma, and all we need to do for the transit is open the isolation valve, turn the voice recorder on, which, well, on our aircraft we have the voice recorder switch on here. I imagine that's on. We'd set the transponder to 2000 standby, ready for the next sector. 2000 standby, and then we'd simply turn the anti-collision light off when the N2 was below 20%, which it should be. I should have checked the engine. There you go, we've got 10%, and then we would call for the transit shutdown checklist. So that, guys, that is it. Welcome to La Palma, where the local time is 1327 Zulu and ahead of schedule. I hope you found this tutorial interesting and learnt something new about NDB approaches. As ever, feel free to leave any comments in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, fly safe, and I'll see you again very soon.